Princess Azaria was born into a royal family, the ruling family of the Elanther Empire. Her family was rich in power, wisdom, and history, but they were also cruel when it came to one thing: offspring. In the Elanther Empire, the royal bloodline was everything. The heir to the throne had to be strong, smart, and capable of carrying the future of the empire. But there was one problem with Princess Azaria. She could never have children. This wasn't something that could be hidden. Not. In a world where royal bloodlines meant more than anything else, as she grew older, the whispers behind closed doors grew louder. She is unfit, they would say. How can we trust her to lead if she cannot even carry the future of her people? Even her parents, King Alaric and Queen Selene, loved her deeply, but felt the weight of the empire's expectations. The princess, the future queen, would never have children to pass down the throne to. And this was a problem that no one knew how to fix. Because of this, Princess Azaria became an outcast. Not in her home, but within the hearts of the people. The halls of the palace, once filled with laughter and joy, now seemed empty. Azaria often found herself walking through them, the walls closing in around her. Her own people rejected her, not because of anything she had done, but because of what she could not give. She was a princess, yes, but not the kind they had hoped for. She was never allowed to forget that Azera had heard the rumors, the whispers. She knew the truth. She wasn't enough. She wasn't the princess they wanted. There was no escaping the truth that every day she walked these halls. But despite the sadness and the pain, she held her head high. She refused to let them see her cry. She had inherited the strength of her ancestors, the blood of warriors and leaders. Even if the future of her empire was not in her hands, she had something that many people didn't: dignity. But dignity did little to ease the loneliness. Princess Azaria often retreated to the garden of the palace, her only escape from the harsh whispers. The garden was a beautiful place, full of exotic plants from all over the galaxy. The air smelled sweet, and the gentle hum of the wind made everything feel calm. But even in the silence of the garden, Azaria couldn't escape the weight of her fate. Every leaf that fell, every flower that bloomed, seemed to remind her of how little time she had before she was forced to face the truth. Princess, you have to take action, the royal advisor would tell her every day. Your future and the future of our people rests on your ability to produce heirs. The words were like daggers. She had heard them so often that they no longer hurt. But the fear in the advisor's voice always made her heart ache. Azaria would nod and turn away, avoiding his eyes. She didn't want to hear it anymore. She couldn't give them what they wanted. What was the point of trying when she knew that her destiny was already written? She was meant to lead, but how could she lead when there was no one left to follow her? At night, Azaria would lie in her bed, staring at the ceiling. The stars outside her window were beautiful, but they only reminded her of how small she felt. She had no future beyond the empire, no one to turn to, and no one to understand her. But one night something changed. Something unexpected, something she never could have imagined, was about to happen. The Elanther Empire had been at war with neighboring star systems for years. The battles were fierce, and many lives had been lost. The Empire's military was one of the largest in the galaxy, but even they knew that without help they could not win. As the threat grew larger, the king made an unexpected decision. He sent a plea for help to Earth, asking for reinforcements from the humans. The humans had been at peace for decades. They were not known for their warlike ways, but they were also known to be brave when needed. King Alaric, desperate to save his empire, did not hesitate to call for their assistance. In return, the king promised them anything they wanted, even power and influence within the empire. In response, the humans sent their best soldiers, among them Captain Ethan Wells. He was a young officer, strong and skilled, with a reputation for getting the job done. He had heard of the Elanther Empire and their struggles, but he had never imagined he would be part of the solution. Ethan had trained for years, but no amount of training could have prepared him for what he was about to face. When Ethan and his team arrived on the Elanther homeworld, they were greeted with pomp and ceremony. The palace, which once seemed grand and filled with life, now felt cold and empty. The empire was clearly on the brink, and it showed in the faces of everyone they passed. The king and queen were weary, their faces etched with worry and regret. They needed help, but they also needed hope. Ethan's first day at the palace was filled with meetings and briefings. But through it all, he couldn't help but notice the sadness that seemed to hang in the air. Everywhere he went, there were whispers, and the faces of the royal family seemed tired, burdened. But it was one person in particular who caught his attention: Princess Azaria. He had heard rumors about her, how she was the heir to the throne, yet she was treated as an outcast. He had been told that she was infertile and could not carry the royal bloodline. At first, Ethan didn't understand what that meant. It was only when he saw her for the first time that it all became clear. She was walking in the palace gardens, alone, her head down, her steps slow. The sunlight caught her silver hair, making it shine like strands of starlight. There was something about the way she moved, as if the weight of the universe was resting on her shoulders. Her face was beautiful, but there was an emptiness in her eyes, as if she had seen too much pain and loss for someone so young. Ethan had seen war, seen people broken by the battles they fought, but this was different. Azaria didn't wear armor or wield weapons, yet she seemed to carry the greatest burden of them all. Curious and troubled by the sight, Ethan found himself watching her from a distance, wanting to understand more. He had never met anyone like her before. He knew nothing of her pain, but he could feel it, as if it was wrapped around her heart, keeping her distant from everyone else. Days passed, and the princess remained an enigma. She was always surrounded by palace staff or advisors, but never by friends or family. The only time Ethan saw her truly alone was in the gardens, where she would retreat to escape the weight of her crown. It wasn't long before Ethan found an opportunity to speak to her. It was late one afternoon, and the palace was quiet. He saw her walking alone again, and this time he followed. Couldn't stop himself. Something inside him told him that he needed to talk to her to break through the walls she had built around herself. "Princess," he called gently, stepping into her path. Azaria stopped, her eyes widening for a moment in surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to approach her, let alone a human soldier. She tried to keep her distance, but there was something about Ethan's gaze, something warm, understanding, that made her hesitate. "I'm Captain Ethan Wells." He introduced himself, his voice calm but firm. "I've heard about you, wanted to meet you. I wanted to tell you that ... I don't see you the way others do." Azoria's heart skipped a beat. She'd heard the whispers, seen the looks, but she'd never heard anyone speak to her like this. She didn't know how to respond. "I know what they say," Ethan continued, not waiting for her to speak. "But I don't believe it. I don't think you should be judged for something that's out of your control." Azaria looked down, not knowing what to say. She had heard the same words from others, but they never felt genuine. And yet here was a stranger, a soldier, no less offering her kindness, something she hadn't felt in years. "You don't know anything about me," she whispered. "I don't," Ethan admitted. "But I want to know. I think you deserve to be seen for who you are, not for what you can or can't do." For a long moment, Azaria remained silent, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like this. She didn't know whether to thank him or to run away. She was so used to rejection that this kindness almost felt foreign. "Why would you care?" she finally asked, her voice soft. "Because I see you," Ethan replied simply. "I see you as more than a princess, more than a title. I see a person who is hurting and deserves more than this." Azaria didn't know what to say. All she could do was stare at him, feeling both grateful and confused. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for her to speak, before he slowly turned and left, leaving her alone once again. But this time, something had shifted inside her. The pain in her heart seemed a little less heavy. The walls she had built around herself seemed to crack ever so slightly. For the first time in a long time, Azaria felt something other than loneliness. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she felt a strange hope building inside her. Ethan Wells had seen her, truly seen her, and that made all the difference. The days following their conversation in the garden felt different for Azaria. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about Captain Ethan Wells that lingered in her thoughts long after he had walked away. It wasn't just the way he spoke to her, but the kindness in his eyes, the understanding that she had never received from anyone, not even her own family. Azaria spent the next few days lost in her thoughts, walking the halls of the palace, trying to make sense of what had happened. She had seen soldiers before, heard their stories, and even spoken to a few of them in passing. But none had ever made her feel the way Ethan had. He wasn't like the others. He didn't treat her with pity or scorn. He had looked at her as if she was someone worth knowing, not just a princess with a broken legacy. In the quiet of her chambers, Azaria stared out of her window at the stars above. She had spent so much of her life believing that she was worthless, that her inability to have children had made her less than what she was meant to be. But Ethan had shattered that belief, even if only for a moment. She wondered if it was foolish to even think about him. After all, she was a princess, and he was just a soldier. He had his own life, his own world, and she was just a stranger to him. But despite these thoughts, she couldn't help herself. There was something inside her that wanted to know more about him. The next day, during a break from the constant meetings about the war and their alliances, Azaria found herself walking. Once again, through the palace gardens. She hadn't planned it, but it was the only place where she could find peace. The flowers were in full bloom, and the scent of the blossoms filled the air. But it was the quiet that she craved the most. As she walked slowly down the path, lost in her thoughts, she saw him again. Ethan. He was standing near the fountain, his back turned to her as he studied the water. He looked strong, his uniform fitting perfectly against his broad shoulders. But it wasn't just his appearance that caught her attention, it was the way he carried himself. He wasn't standing at attention or looking around for something to do. He was simply ... existing. It was peaceful, and that was something Azaria hadn't felt in a long time. This time, when she approached, Ethan turned around. His face lit up when he saw her, and the warmth in his expression made her heart skip a beat. For a moment, she hesitated. She wasn't used to this being seen, being noticed. But then she reminded herself that he had already seen her, truly. Seen her, and it didn't matter that she wasn't the princess everyone expected her to be, Princess Azaria. Ethan said with a smile, his voice calm but inviting, "It's good to see you again." Azaria found herself smiling back. "Captain Wells," she replied softly. "I didn't expect to find you here." Ethan shrugged, his expression casual. "I needed a break. The palace can feel a bit overwhelming. Sometimes, and the garden is quiet. Thought you might be here too." Azaria's heart fluttered at the thought that he had been looking for her. She couldn't deny that she was pleased by his words, even though she tried to remain composed. "It's peaceful here," she agreed. "The gardens are my favorite place to be." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the fountain, the only noise around them. Azaria felt the weight of the conversation they had shared before. But this time it felt different. There was no pressure. There was no expectation. It was just the two of them, in this beautiful place. And for once, Azaria didn't feel the burden of being a princess. She felt like just a person. "I'm glad you came here today," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "I was hoping we could talk again." Azaria looked up at him, her gaze meeting his. "Talk about what?" "About you," Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. "About who you are. Not about being a princess or about the empire, but about you." Azaria felt her heart tighten. No one had ever asked her that before. They always talked about her duty, about what she could or couldn't do for her people, but no one had ever taken the time to ask about her. Her. "I'm not who they want me to be," Azaria whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not what they expect." Ethan's expression softened, and he stepped closer. "I don't think they understand you," he said quietly. "I don't think anyone does, but I want to. I want to know you, Azaria. The person you are, not the princess you're forced to be." For a moment, Azaria couldn't speak. She had never let anyone see her like this before. She had always hidden behind the title, the responsibilities, the expectations. But Ethan ... He saw through all of it. He saw her for who she was. "I'm afraid," Azaria finally admitted, her voice trembling. Afraid that I'm not enough, that I'll never be what they want me to be. You're more than enough, Ethan replied, his voice full of certainty, more than they'll ever know. And I think that's what matters. Azaria looked into his eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Ethan wasn't like the others. He didn't see her as a failure. He saw her as a person, someone worthy of love and respect. As they stood there, the weight of the galaxy seemed to lift from her shoulders, if only for a moment. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had someone who truly understood her. Ethan smiled, and Azaria returned it, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. In that moment, she realized something. It wasn't about being a princess. It wasn't about her ability to produce heirs for the Empire. It was about who she was inside, and for the first time she felt like that was enough. The days following their quiet conversation in the gardens seemed to stretch on in a haze for Princess Azaria. The weight of her royal responsibilities remained, but something within her had shifted. There was a small, flickering light of hope she hadn't felt in years. The kind that told her it was okay to be more than just a princess, more than just the heir to the throne. She could be herself, and she couldn't ignore the way Captain Ethan Wells made her feel. His words, his kindness, his respect, they all made her question the way she had lived her life up until now. She wasn't just a princess to him, a royal figure with expectations and burdens. She was Azaria, a person with hopes, fears, and dreams. As the days went by, their paths crossed more frequently. Azaria would find herself in the palace gardens, walking aimlessly, her thoughts tangled in a storm of emotions. She'd turn a corner, and there he would be standing near the fountain, or by the outer wall, looking out toward the stars. He always greeted her with a warm smile, a gentle look that made her feel seen, truly seen. For the first time in her life, they began to spend more time together. At first, it was simple conversations about the war, about their cultures, about the differences between their worlds. But over time, the conversations became more personal. Ethan asked her about her childhood, about her hopes for the future, even about her fears. And Azaria found herself answering, the words flowing easily between them. She had never opened up like this before, not even to her family. She had always been taught to carry the weight of the Empire, to be strong, to be perfect. But with Ethan, she could be vulnerable, she could be human. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a soft golden glow over the palace grounds, Ethan and Azaria walked side by side through the gardens. The air was cool, and the sound of birds chirping in the distance added a sense of peace that Azaria had come to cherish. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence, if everything were different? If there were no empire, no expectations, no titles? Just people living their lives without the weight of the world on their shoulders? Azaria glanced at him, her brow furrowed slightly. She had never allowed herself to think of such a thing. Her entire life had been shaped by duty, by the responsibilities placed on her from the moment she was born. "I don't know if I've ever had the luxury of wondering about that," she replied softly. "My life has always been about the Empire, about the future. I've never thought about what I might want." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're so focused on the future, we forget to live in the present, forget to be who we really are." Azaria felt a pang in her chest. She had spent so many years suppressing her own desires, her own identity, in favor of fulfilling the Empire's needs. But Ethan's words made her question everything. What if there was more to her life than being a princess? What if she could be happy, free of the chains of expectation? "You're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never thought about what I want. I've always tried to do what was expected of me." "And what do you want now?" Ethan asked, his eyes fixed on her. Azaria stopped, walking, turning to face him. She looked at him for a long moment, feeling the weight of his question. She had spent so much time worrying about her future, about her role in the Empire, that she hadn't considered her own happiness. The thought of it felt foreign to her. But here, with Ethan, it didn't seem so impossible. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft but honest. but I think I want to know what it feels like to be free, to live for myself for once." Ethan smiled gently, his expression warm and encouraging. "Then let's take it one step at a time. We don't have to have all the answers right now, but we can start by living for today, for this moment." Azaria felt a smile tug at her lips, a smile that had been a long time coming. She had always been so serious, so burdened by the expectations of others. But with Ethan, it felt like the weight had lifted, if only for a brief moment. She felt lighter, freer, as though she could breathe again. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude, "for making me see that I can still have a life outside of all this, that I can be more than just a princess." Ethan chuckled softly. "You're more than just a princess. You're Azaria. And that's who I see." The words warmed her heart, in a way she hadn't experienced before. She didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to be the ideal princess, the perfect heir. She could just be herself. As they continued walking through the gardens, side by side, Azaria felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. She wasn't just fulfilling a role, she was discovering who she truly was. And for that, she was thankful to Ethan. Their conversations continued, growing deeper with each passing day. They talked about their hopes, their fears, and their dreams for the future, and with each word, Azaria felt herself opening up more, allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she never had before. Ethan listened to her without judgment, offering his support and understanding without expectation. In his presence, she began to believe that maybe there was more to life than what she had been taught. There was love, there was friendship, and there was the possibility of happiness. And as the days turned into weeks, Azaria started to wonder if Ethan might be the one who could show her a life beyond the palace walls, a life where she could be herself, free of the expectations that had held her captive for so long. The sun had begun to set over the Elanther Empire, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple as Princess Azaria stood on the balcony of the palace. The stars were beginning to appear, twinkling like diamonds against the darkening sky. But despite the beauty of the view, Azaria couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The quiet peace she had found in her time with Captain Ethan Wells was now being overshadowed by whispers in the palace. Lately, their meetings had become more frequent. Ethan had made it clear that he wanted to spend more time with her, and despite the growing tension within her royal family, Azaria welcomed the moments she could escape into the warmth of his presence. They would talk, laugh, and even sit in silence, just enjoying each other's company. With him, she felt more like a person than a princess, a person who could be loved for who she truly was. But now, the reality of their connection was beginning to surface. Word had spread across the palace that Captain Ethan and Princess Azaria had grown close, and not everyone was pleased. The royal advisors, the nobles, and even her own family began to murmur in private, questioning the relationship. The whispers grew louder each day. It wasn't just the fact that Azaria was spending time with a human soldier, it was that she seemed to be finding comfort in him. They didn't understand. They didn't know what it was like to feel seen, truly seen by someone who didn't care about bloodlines or titles. Azaria's heart ached as she thought about her family's expectations. Her parents, King Alaric and Queen Selene, had always been kind to her, but even they couldn't hide their disappointment.
Ow!
They had raised her to be the heir to the throne, to carry the weight of the empire on her shoulders. They had hoped that someday she would marry someone within the Elanther royal circle, someone who could give them the heirs they so desperately needed. They didn't understand why Azaria seemed to drift further from their plans with every passing day. "Princess, you must be careful," one of the royal advisors had warned her just a few days ago. "Your actions reflect on the entire empire. The people are watching you. If you continue this relationship with a human soldier, it will bring shame to the royal family. You must put the needs of the empire first." But Azaria was tired of being seen only for her bloodline, tired of being told what she should do with her life. She had spent so many years hiding behind her title, afraid to let anyone see the person beneath the crown. But Ethan had shown her that there was more to life than fulfilling the expectations of others. He had made her believe that she deserved to be happy. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan visited her once again. He found her standing by the balcony, her gaze fixed on the stars. He approached her quietly, his footsteps soft against the marble floor. When she heard him, she turned and smiled, the weight of the world lifting from her shoulders for a moment. "You're here again," Azaria said, her voice light and filled with warmth. Ethan grinned, his eyes sparkling. "I couldn't stay away. I thought you might need some company." Azaria laughed softly, her heart lightening at his words. "I always welcome your company." For a moment, they stood there in silence, watching the stars together. But then, as if compelled by something deep within him, Ethan spoke. "Azaria," he began, his voice serious but gentle. "There's something I need to say, something that's been on my mind for a while now." Azaria looked at him, her expression softening. "What is it, Ethan?" He took a deep breath, stepping closer to her. "I can't stop thinking about you. Everything about youth, the way you carry yourself, the kindness you show, the strength you hide behind that crown. You're not just a princess. You're someone I want to spend my life with. And I know this might sound crazy, but I want to ask you something important." Azaria's heart skipped a beat. She had sensed the change in their relationship, the growing closeness between them. But she hadn't expected him to speak so plainly. His words stirred something deep within her, a feeling she had never allowed herself to fully acknowledge. "What are you asking?" she whispered, her breath catching in her throat. Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady. "I want to marry you, Azaria. I want to be with you not because of your title, not because of your bloodline, but because of who you are. You are the woman I love, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." Azaria stood frozen, her mind racing. She had never expected anyone, let alone a human soldier, to ask her for her hand in marriage. The idea of leaving behind the empire, the expectations, the duty, terrified her. But it also thrilled her. Could she have a future with Ethan? Could she choose him over everything else? She searched his eyes, looking for any sign of doubt, but there was none. He was sincere. He wanted her. And for the first time in her life, Azaria felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it was possible to have a life outside of the empire. Maybe it was possible to be loved for who she truly was. But as the silence stretched on, reality set in. This wasn't just about her. If she accepted Ethan's proposal, it would mean defying her family, her empire, and everything she had been taught to believe. It would mean giving up her role as the heir to the throne. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "this is crazy. You know, it's not just about us. I marry you, I'm turning my back on everything I've been raised to do. I'm abandoning my duty." Ethan's expression softened, and he took her hands in his. "I don't want you to abandon anything. I just want you to choose your happiness. If you choose me, we will face everything together. The empire, your family, the future, it will all come. But you don't have to carry it alone." Azaria's heart raced. For the first time in her life, she was faced with a choice that wasn't about duty or obligation. It was about love. Time, she realized that love might be enough. The days after Ethan's proposal passed in a blur of emotions. Azaria felt torn between her heart and the responsibilities that had shaped her entire life. She had always known what was expected of her. She had spent years preparing to be the ruler of the Elanther Empire, but now, for the first time, she was faced with a choice that didn't have to do with the empire or her family's wishes. It was about her own happiness, her own future, and Ethan. The night after Ethan's proposal, Azaria couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her chambers, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. She had never imagined a life outside of the empire, outside of the crown she was meant to wear. But now, for the first time, she wondered if there was more to life than just duty. Could she really leave everything behind for love? Could she choose Ethan over the future she had always been trained to accept? As the sun began to rise, Azaria made up her mind. She knew that the decision she was about to make would change everything. But in that moment she realized that it was her life to live, and she had the right to choose what would make her happy. She would no longer live for others' expectations. She would live for herself. That morning, she called for Ethan. She needed to see him, to speak with him, and to finally make the decision that had been weighing on her heart. When Ethan arrived at her chambers, his face was filled with hope, but there was also a hint of nervousness in his eyes. He didn't know what she was going to say, and neither did she. "I've been thinking about what you said," Azaria began, her voice steady but soft, "about marriage, about our future, about everything." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Azaria, if you're having second thoughts?" "No," Azaria interrupted quickly, her eyes locking with his. "It's not that. I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been thinking about my life, the Empire, my family. I've realized something." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've always done what was expected of me. I've always put the Empire first. Always carried the weight of the crown. But I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be the person they want me to be. I want to be the person I am." Ethan's eyes softened, and he took a step closer to her. "Azaria." She smiled at him, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. "Ethan, I love you. I love the way you see me, the way you make me feel like I'm more than just a princess. You make me believe that there is more to life than duty, and that maybe, just maybe, I can choose my own happiness." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had been waiting for this moment, hoping she would come to this conclusion. But hearing her say the words out loud made his heart swell with joy. He stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "Azaria, you've made me the happiest man in the galaxy. I promise you, we will face everything together. The Empire, your family, the future will make it work, as long as we have each other." Tears welled up in Azaria's eyes as she looked at him. She had never thought this moment would come, but here it was. The choice was hers, and she had chosen love. "I don't know what will happen after this," Azaria said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm willing to take that step with you. I'm willing to leave behind everything I've known and start something new with you." Ethan smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. "Then we'll build our future together, Azaria. But whatever comes, we'll face it side by side." As the two of them stood there, hands entwined, Azaria felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She wasn't just a symbol of the Empire's future. She was Azaria, a woman with a heart full of love and a future that she could choose for herself. And that future included Ethan. The news of their engagement spread quickly throughout the palace. It shocked many, but for the first time in years, Azaria didn't care about what others thought. She was no longer a puppet in the hands of the Empire. She was her own person, and she had chosen the life she wanted. Her parents, King Alaric and Queen Selene, were less than thrilled with her decision. They had always hoped she would marry within their empire, secure the throne with a union that would benefit the future of the Elanther Empire. But when they saw the determination in her eyes, the courage she had found within herself, they knew there was no changing her mind. Azaria wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a woman who had chosen her own path. "Azaria," her father said softly, his voice filled with both concern and love, "this is a difficult choice, but I understand now. You are not bound by the Empire's expectations. You are free to make your own choices, to live your own life. I may not agree with this decision, but I will support you." Her mother, Queen Selene, took her hand, her eyes filled with pride. "I've always wanted you to be happy, my dear. If this is what makes you happy, then I will stand by your side." With her family's reluctant but heartfelt approval, Azaria and Ethan began to plan their future together. They didn't know what would come next, but they knew that whatever it was, they would face it as equals. The Empire would have to adjust to their new reality. The royal family would have to accept that Azaria was no longer the princess they had expected her to be. But that was okay. She had finally found her voice, and she would use it to shape the life she wanted. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Azaria felt ready to face it. She had chosen love, and that choice more than anything, had set her free.